Good evening. To make myself perfectly clear, the greatest health menace in this country today is smoking. But that's not the aspect of health I'm going to talk about tonight. First, here is Ted with the rundown.
Tonight on Webster, Finance Minister Mel Couvalier says the rising cost of health care in BC is driven by the fee schedule of our physicians. What do the doctors think? For a reaction from the medical profession, Dr. John O'Brien Bell, president of the BC Medical Association, is coming up with Webster. For the past 20 years, the Canadian Executive Service Organization has been placing retired volunteers where they're needed most. Later with Webster, Robert Dale, chairman of the board for CASO, and Peter Rogers, a CASO volunteer. But first, what's the biggest health problem facing Canada today? And what's the biggest problem facing working Canadian parents? Webster poses these questions and more to Jake Epp, Minister of National Health and Welfare.
Mr. Epp, I'm going to change my opening phrase. I said that apart from smoking, we're going to talk about the greatest health menace facing Canadians. Now, which is the greatest health menace to Canadians today? Is it smoking, or is it the potential exponential explosion of AIDS?
Well, at the present time, and I don't think you can really do a comparison, Jack, over 30,000 Canadians die prematurely because of smoking a year. In terms of AIDS, at the present time, we have 947 cases as of this morning. We have had 400 and approximately 90 deaths. But you are right when you say that the potential of the number of deaths and illness due to AIDS, if we see the rampant increase that we've seen since '82, we are now doubling our numbers approximately every 10 to 12 months. That obviously is a very, very major issue.
So that means that next year we'll have close to 1,000 dead from AIDS in British Columbia, maybe 1,800, 1,000 dead from AIDS.
We'll have 1,000 cases, and generally when an AIDS patient is diagnosed as having AIDS, there's generally a 50% rate of death in 24 months following after the diagnosis.
But once you are in possession of the AIDS virus, as far as medical evidence goes now, an increasing number of carriers develop the disease in what seems to be a shorter period of years.
Well, that is the case, and also what we of course do not know with all the research that's being done both nationally and internationally is whether or not we can find a cure, and if not a cure, at least an antibiotic. That, of course, is...
an antidote, you mean?
That's right.
A vaccine?
A vaccine. We know it's a virus. We generally know how viruses operate. We generally know what to do with viruses. In this case, with the mutations, we do not.
Now, in British Columbia, just to remind people, in fact, you give me the figures for British Columbia.
Well, British Columbia, as of this morning, would have 208 cases, of which
full-blown AIDS.
Full-blown AIDS, of which 105 are dead. And possibly a better figure would be if you take a look at cases per million population. British Columbia is by far the highest, with over 71 per million, while the next would be Ontario and Quebec at approximately 44 per million. And it drops all the way down to 0 in places like Prince Edward Island.
And I have a figure which you may or may not agree with about the number of positive carriers of the AIDS virus in British Columbia. What's your figure?
I can give you a Canadian figure, which we have extrapolated at approximately 50,000. I've made that public before. The number of people that would develop AIDS-related complex or full-blown AIDS varies, but you could figure a percentage anywhere from a quarter of those cases to 35% at the present knowledge base.
Yeah, we say the medical health people here say that we have about 15,000 positive carriers. Now, what is the answer? What action must this country take now? Or do you believe, as I've been told by other politicians, that the real answer and the only answer to the spread of AIDS is abstinence, followed perhaps at best by monogamy?
Well, I think there are many answers, and there's no one single answer. If you take a look, let's first of all look at the situation we have now, Jack. What we now have, no matter what the sexual practices of an individual are, AIDS has a long incubation period, 5 years, maybe as high as 10 years. And so people who have engaged in multiple sex partners, especially homosexual sex partners, those people are at high risk, and we call them a high-risk group. Now, if you're taking a look at protection for the future, that is for people not involved in those groups or who are not infected, obviously abstinence is the best protection. a monogamous relationship is a better protection than those who have multiple partners. And we've said protect yourselves if you choose to live life that way. And for instance, condoms do give protection. Not 100%, but it's obviously a better situation than not protecting yourself at all. And I've said quite clearly those are the three methods, and Canadians will have to take responsibility. But on the other hand, it is my responsibility to give the educational detail as to what can happen to people if in fact they choose certain styles of multiple
At what age
sexual
should
partners.
the specific education about the AIDS menace be given to the community? What age should we start at?
Well, of course, I get into a provincial situation very quickly when you ask me the question, but let me get to it. I've seen, for instance, the programs in Europe, and the same controversy rages there, whether it's in the UK or in other countries, but especially the UK. And many people say that that education should take place with children who are first exposed to education, sex education, and sexually transmitted diseases of any kind. And some would argue that it is best to do it in the home, and maybe I would agree if I knew it was taking place in the home. But I think all of us know that it doesn't take place in many homes or in all homes, and that in other places it should take place in schools. I think many people would argue it depends also who gives the message.
And how it's given.
And how it's given.
And what manner in which it is delivered. For instance, it would offend you to see, as we have seen on some television, the graphic demonstration of phallic items and condoms.
Look, I think you can give people education by giving them education without being sensational.
Now, do you agree with the Telecasters Committee supported largely
No,
by...
I don't.
Let me put my question first, Mr. Minister. Do you agree with the Telecasters Committee, largely supported by many broadcasters, where they rejected, I think, all but one of the public service announcements from the Canadian Public Health Association on the grounds that they felt it kind of promoted multiple partners and ipso facto promiscuity?
Look, Jack, I think you know me, and I think a lot of Canadians know some of my positions on these issues. If it would have, if those ads would have promoted promiscuity or casual sex, Jacob would not have approved them. I believe that those ads, and that's why I disagree with the Canadian Telecasters Committee, that those ads did take cognizance, first of all, of the AIDS threat, which you and I have spoken about. Mm-hmm. Secondly, the need for education. Mm-hmm. And thirdly, an educational pattern which gives details as to how to protect oneself or give further information if one wants or needs that further information. We also had an ad, and you said one was approved, and that was the family ad that we brought in. Other jurisdictions have not done so. I did that for the very purpose that that aspect of protection was also conveyed. Now, when I jumped in, I just did a Jack Webster. I jumped in because I think the Canadian Telecasters Committee was very inconsistent when, on the one hand, at the same period of time, they approved ads for condoms for commercial purposes, but said that our ads were not, that they couldn't use them because they promoted casual sex. Now, I should be fair. The Canadian Association of Broadcasters, who are not bound by the committee, I understand are re-examining this issue. I should say also that some broadcasters broke with the CTC, and if I can be a bit of a homer, the first television station that used all 4 ads was a little television station in Brandon, Manitoba.
Now, the multiple partner aspect, I can understand that upsetting a number of people, but your view is, and I kind of agree with you myself, is that AIDS kills.
We have not got any cure for AIDS.
You accept the fact that in today's lifestyle there is and there will be a measure of multiple partnership sex, if not much promiscuity.
That's why we have AIDS.
But don't you think that this whole AIDS thing will bring about a complete sexual revolution in Canada? In the mores to which we think we know about in today's society?
Well, look, Jack, the old fundamentals, I think, were pretty sound. People chose to live differently, and some people now say that the sexual revolution is being changed. I can't answer that question. The only evidence, if it is evidence, is that some medical staffs tell me that there are fewer cases of certain forms of gonorrhea. Whether or not that is an indication of a sexual revolution, I can't really say.
What do you plan to do? You're not spending very much money on AIDS, are you? You've got a 5-year program with a miserable $39 million.
Well, Jack, first of all, I've never heard you talk about $39 million as miserable before knowing your background. But seriously, in 1982, we had our first case reported or recorded in Canada. And the former government, my predecessor, brought in a small program, and I think was worthy of the times. We had to look at a 5-year program. We came in with $39 million. About $22 million of that is research. Additional research comes from the Medical Research Council. It also comes from NHRDP, from my department. It comes from provinces. So the $39 million is substantially higher than the 5-year program. I have also said that I will put more money into it if the case can be shown. But I've said, look, I'm not going to spend more money till we've even launched the program.
And now you'll agree with my initial correction of my own statement that in the public mind, the greatest single menace to health in Canada today is AIDS.
Well, Jack, it is true in this sense. The public expects from its medical people that they have information and that they have the ability to to cure disease and to keep the illness from attacking you. And in this case, we haven't got the answer, and that's really the frightening part.
More and your calls to Jacob, the Minister of Health from Ottawa, and the Conservative government after the break. I've done a fair bit of reporting on and around AIDS in British Columbia, and I must tell you, my own opinion is that you cannot be too blunt. Like you, though, I'm worried about the sensitivity of certain types of advertising and certain types of education. But one thing that worries me, just to change the subject for a second, is you opening the door to Canada being hijacked for fantastic prices on brand-name drugs and not giving us a generic protection which has saved us an awful lot of money.
Well, first of all, Jack, you made a number of statements in that intro which have to be challenged. There's no question that the generic drug industry has saved Canadians money, and the generic drug industry will survive. I should put it this way, the largest drug company in Canada today is generic. That's number one. A lot of Canadians don't know that. Secondly, Canadians want the very best drugs, whether they are produced in Canada or worldwide. Let me give you just two. Cyclosporin, which is the anti-rejection drug, which we today all laud organ transplants. When a guy gets a new heart, we say, wonderful, cyclosporin. We pay for that cyclosporin for life for that person, which we have to do. So we pay world price. We either produce it or we pay the world price. The other one was AZT. AZT is a experimental drug now approved in the United States for certain financial reasons. I wanted an AZT clinical study in Canada for AIDS patients. Burroughs Wellcome, the company that produces that drug, said, if we do this, we're willing to do a clinical trial. But Jake, how do we protect ourselves? We don't have any patent protection in Canada with your law. Those are some of the practical realities.
And are you getting an AZT clinical test in here?
We have them right now.
And for that, you had to give them patent protection?
We didn't have to. We got a special deal from them, but they're not going to do it very often.
But you say that, mind you, the change in costs between generic and brand names, Canada and the States, I don't have to quote you the figures, are horrifying.
Well, that's why, but in the Act, Jack, we're putting in a review system which, if they do not...
and a $100 million subsidy.
That's right. And plus the person who did the study for the Liberals previously, Dr. Eastman.
Yeah.
So we've put in a lot of protection which other countries don't have.
Bankrupt things like the BC's pharmacare system.
No, I think that is...
hyperbole?
Hyperbole, and of course, for public purposes, that's fine, but I don't think it's accurate.
Go ahead to Jake Epp, Minister of Health.
Good afternoon, Jack. Mr. Epp.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes, to get back to these, the issue of these commercials that were produced, the people who ban these commercials, the CTC, I believe they're called, who are they? And
they're an industry committee of telecasters who have, I suppose, a warrant not to do tasteless things on the air, and they believed that it could promote promiscuity and multiple partnership in the references to if, thus, and so, right?
yeah, but just who are these people? I mean, for anybody to make a decision that has any bearing on the public, I think that they themselves should at least step forward and...
Oh, they've been front and center and interviewed on television and Canada AM and everywhere else.
Good Lord, really?
Yeah, you may disagree with the opinion, but they're not hiding the decisions, are they, Jake?
No, well, they're a committee that looks at all ads, as I understand it, for purposes of Canadian telecasting. The Canadian Association of Broadcasters, while they take their advice, I don't think are bound by that advice.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good afternoon. Mr. Rapp, I just want to come back to the question of the generic drugs. If it's true, as Jack has said, that and other people in this province are saying that the cost of Medicare is skyrocketing in this country, don't you believe that your mandate should be, as the Minister of Health, to fight to lower the cost of health care, that one of those major components of the cost of health care is the price of drugs? Don't you find it a little hypocritical to sit there as the Minister of Health and support a policy which is going to not only increase the cost of health care, but skyrocket the price of drugs that are available to Canadians? I'm looking at a graph right now.
No, we know the graphs. I've got the Globe and Mail in front of me myself.
Well, first of all, I don't agree with your premises, and I'll tell you why. First of all, the drugs that are on the market presently cannot increase because of this bill. Secondly, drugs that are not yet in the pipeline or not yet discovered, which get a notice of compliance from my department, you and I do not know what the base price will be. Thirdly, even to avoid that, we brought in a review system headed by Dr. Eastman to avoid exactly the points that you make. The point, though, that I have to give you is this, that while I want and obviously fight for the lowest price of drugs that I can, there is a stark reality, and that is this. We are buying internationally drugs for which we pay a world price. Canadians demand those drugs, whether it's cyclosporin, as I mentioned to you. Keep in mind that a heart transplant patient takes about $3,000 of cyclosporin per year for the rest of his or her life. And we pay that through the system. So if you're saying to me on the one hand, look, I want low prices, but give me the best in the world, then I have to say to you, look, I want to produce some of those myself. By the way, the last drug that we produced in Canada was insulin from the ground up 64 years ago. I don't think Canadians should accept that either.
Yeah, you have talked a lot, and so have your other ministers, about the great new research jobs and availabilities for study and employment and high-tech chemical research. There ain't no guarantees on that, is there?
Jack, there's no guarantees that your ratings will stay up after this program. But there are guarantees.
But I'm not spending...
But Jack, keep in mind that these companies are investing in Canada. They've made public statements now, to which we can hold them under our bill, for approximately $500 million. Now, if that weren't done, Jack, then you would be coming back at me and saying, look, Jake, how come you're not getting investment in high-tech jobs in Canada? You can't have it both ways.
But I merely thought there was a bit of a defect when we hear all this jazz, you know, having been put through the mill by the multinational drug companies for years before the Kefauver Commission blew the lid on them, correct?
Well, we had the same situation in 1969, and that's why we're putting in a review system.
Okay, go ahead from Chilliwack.
Yes, Jack. I got two quick questions for you. One is, does the minister have any plan for advertising in the newspapers or door-to-door along with his TV ads?
Well, that's a good point, because the television industry gives them PSA. You're going to have to buy space in the newspapers or do door-to-door like they did in Britain. AIDS kills. I love you, but not enough to die for you.
Well, if your caller is asking, should we consider... Should we consider putting in a brochure into every home as the UK did? I've asked my National Advisory Committee on AIDS, which is composed of people from across the country, both provincially and federally, whether that is the next route we should go to. They are considering that. If that is their advice, we obviously will consider it.
And probably follow it.
That's right. Now, I should keep in mind, though, as well, we have put forward brochures, for instance, AIDS in Canada. We have put forward brochures to the medical profession and to others. There's been a wide distribution, for example, universities, places where young people gather, but we might have to go further, and I'm open to that.
Why are we so nice, Nelly, compared to the Danes?
Well, we aren't Danes, we're Canadians, and I think what I have to do is keep in mind not only Canadian sensitivities, but put forward information that Canadians will accept.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I worry about the education in the schools, and I'm in favor of the greatest detail. But unlike some of the sex education classes I've heard of, I would like to see them conducted not to mixed classes, and I'll hang up and listen for the answer.
Well, sir, that's a difficult one for me to answer because it gets into, and I'm not trying to dodge the bullet.
But you could give me a personal opinion.
Yeah, well, the province, each province handles this issue in a different way. Each school board might handle it in another way. I think what parents are expecting is accurate information in the most clinical form rather than giving to children a feeling that anything goes. They want a certain moral basis in this whole field as well, undergirding the information. That's a difficult mix, but I think that's what they expect.
Must be done too, would you not agree?
Yes, it has to be done.
More with JCAP after the break. Couple of quick questions. Are you, as the Federal Minister of Health in the Canadian Conservative government, happy or at least content with the present therapeutic abortion legislation?
The Minister of Justice has indicated that there will be no change in that law.
Have you got $11 billion or whatever it is to supply when the report comes down on the 23rd or 25th of this month, proper child care for the single-parent families, the working women, the children who are under 12 who are left on their own as latchkey kids, and with the 6 of 10 Canadian women with children under 16 now working outside the home?
We don't have $11 billion. I don't think Canadian society has $11 billion as Katie Cook recommended. But if you're saying, do we want to come in with a child care program as well as some help for women who decide to stay at home and nurture their children at home, the Prime Minister has very clearly said yes, and we hope to have that in front of the Canadian people by the middle of this year.
Do you get annoyed when people put it to you that you are old-fashioned and that you prefer the traditional family and that the best thing for a mother to do is to stay home and bring up her own children?
Jack, what I did say, and by the way, I think families are great. And if I'm traditional, people can accuse me of that as well. But what I did say was this, that one should not take for granted, as the Katie Cook report does, that families cannot train children well. There are great families, and that's the best place for kids. There are some families where there are social problems, and that those children do not have the best training. You know that, I know that.
And that includes families with money as well as those who are hard up.
It has nothing to do with social status or financial income.
Although money helps.
In all
Anyways,
cases.
that's just a offhand remark. Go ahead to JCAP, the Federal Minister of Health.
Mr. Minister, 2 quick questions. Do you think it's more important if the government should handle daycare or the businesses?
Well, if you're asking me, should commercial daycare centers receive some financial help from the public purse? I'll give you an example. Whether it's in British Columbia, Alberta, or Ontario, and I choose those advisedly because of the configurations, many of them are saying, look, you should give us some help as well and give parents the choice. I don't know what the federal government will come down with, but personally I've said I have no philosophical problem with also including commercial daycare.
It's a question of enough money.
That's right.
And you're strapped.
I think all governments are strapped, and we have to keep in mind it's taxpayers' money we're dealing with.
Agreed. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I just think probably Mr. Epp from the part of Manitoba he comes from has got a very strict religious background, and I want to commend him for his openness and on the subject of AIDS and what they're doing for it federally, and I think our provincial leaders could take a lot of leadership from him and not put their narrow religious views in front on AIDS and abortion.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, please.
Yes, could Mr. Epp give us his opinion of what the user's fee is on the drugs to senior citizens? And number 2...
Just a moment. That's Social Credit recently slapped the dispensing fee up to $125 on pharmacare. That's none of your business?
It's none of my business, but I am aware of what is happening in British Columbia. Similar things are happening in other provinces where the provinces are trying to recover some of the cost and also cap some of the escalation on costs.
Can you ever cap escalation on?
No, you can't cap escalation. Hopefully you can reduce escalation.
Reduce the rate of escalation.
Precisely.
Like trying to get the federal budget down a tinsy-winsy bit at a time instead of going up.
Well, not a teensy bit of, Jack. If you take a look at discretionary spending, for the first time in 40 years, it's been frozen. 40 years, even in your lifetime and mine, that's a long period of time.
Go ahead, please.
Hi, Mr. Epp. I'd just like to know if the government has any plans for widespread AIDS testing facilities.
You're talking about AIDS testing for AIDS?
Widespread AIDS testing facilities.
Ma'am, the answer is no, and I'll give you the reasons, even though it's hard to explain. I don't think if you take a look at the disease and the long incubation period, you first of all would have to make a number of fundamental decisions. A, whom do you test? And B, even if you test, what do you do at that point? And keep in mind as well that to the best of our medical knowledge, the only manner in which AIDS can be transmitted is by close sexual contact and the transference of body fluids. So I don't think that testing of AIDS for AIDS universally is an approach that I would favor. Additionally, I think what you should take a look at, there are those people who are concerned, and we've said to them, go back to your doctor for both physical reasons and peace of mind and have a test if that is in your interest.
And that's done by the provincial medical laboratories,
Precisely.
is it not? And they haven't really got the second generation of tests. That situation may change with more research down the road.
Well, that might change. Let's keep in mind, and if we can put a plug in, the 40th anniversary of the Red Cross blood donation service is being celebrated in Vancouver tonight, and that's one of the reasons I'm here. I think we've got a very good blood donation system, and keep in mind that after 1985, all blood products were heat treated and all blood donations are tested. So what we're really dealing with for almost every case is a pre-1985 phenomenon.
Look at that statement in the United States, though, recommending that anybody who'd received multiple blood in the last so many years, 37 million people, should go for testing. You're not in the state of mind to do that at all.
I'm not advising that because those people that had medical help and medical care, and most of them will have had blood tests through the medical procedures they underwent at the time.
Oops. Sorry, I've hit the wrong button somewhere. Very silly of me. Go ahead, please.
Hello, am I on?
Yes, you are.
Mr. Epp, I was wondering if you would agree that it's kind of hypocritic of the broadcasters in Canada to refuse AIDS ads when they run so many ads dealing with sex to sell everything from booze to cars to you name it.
Well, I'll take another approach if you don't mind.
But is that not a reflection on our society?
Well, advertising does reflect society, and some people would say it also molds society. But let me give you another case where I think there's an inconsistency. We have had for a long period of time advertising of female hygienic products, and yet when we got into this, where we were doing it for a health reason, there was this reaction. I think, though, in fairness to the Canadian Association of Broadcasters, they've heard the public reaction, they're re-examining it, and I'm a great believer in sober second thought. I think they'll come around.
Go ahead from Victoria.
Yes, I have a point to make about AIDS and condoms. AIDS are the ads for the condoms are not ads for AIDS. They're ads for condoms. Are we going to suggest, encourage, or teach our children, or anybody for that matter, that they should protect their lives with a piece of rubber the thickness of a piece of paper?
I don't think anyone's saying that.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, hello. I wanted to ask Mr. Epp about what he feels about mandatory blood testing for people that are working with food. I work for an airline, and I am a flight attendant. Sorry, I don't want to leave my name or the airline I work for. I've lost some friends to AIDS, and we work with it. I would say approximately 50% of the male flight attendants are...
Well, we don't know that. I wouldn't like to scandalize or to generalize your comment, but we know what you're saying, and you're asking the minister if there should be mandatory AIDS tests for flight crews.
Well, not just flight crews, but anybody working with food.
Oh, food services.
Well, again, I think that we are handling this matter as responsibly as we can for those people who feel that they should undergo testing. We've obviously given that indication that they should. But to the best of our medical knowledge, we know how AIDS is transmitted. People can protect themselves. We've given those protections pretty clearly. It is a matter now of the will, whether or not people will, in fact, protect themselves and protect society.
Well, thank you for a very full and frank interview on a very delicate subject. Little did I think, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when we barely talked about anything on the health side, we'd be sitting down and talking in the specific detail we've talked about today.
Jack, it's always nice to see you.
My thanks to you. The Honourable Jake Epp, Minister of Health in the Federal Government at Ottawa. Next, we'll have the doctor in after the break.
The doctor is in.
As senior partners in the healthcare system, physicians in our province enjoy fees which are substantially higher than those in the rest of Canada. I am confident that because of their shared concern, our doctors will cooperate with the government and play a full part in helping reduce costs so we can continue to maintain the best possible level of service to people.
the provincial government budgeted a few extra millions to catch up on some of the inflation of healthcare costs in British Columbia. But what came to my attention right off the bat, and I have with me Dr. John O'Brien Bell, President of the BCMA, was that he says that you physicians in BC enjoy fees which are substantially higher than those in the rest of Canada, a fee schedule that's significantly above the national average, and utilization increases well above the rate of increase in our population, and he wants you to correct your act and cut down the utilization and the money collected by well-paid doctors, overpaid doctors. What do you say to that small charge?
Well, perhaps we'd better correct his figures. BC doctors are not substantially higher than those in the rest of Canada. What is true is that the BC fee schedule is 20% higher than the average of the 10 provinces. And there are 3 provinces, BC, Alberta, and Ontario, who are close together. And there are provinces like Newfoundland, Quebec, New Brunswick, which are very low. And they are unacceptably low, and the right route is to up the low fee schedules to reasonable levels and not cut Ontario, BC, and Alberta. And if you take the fee schedule and look at the individual items, the proof is there. For example, Mr. Van der Zalm had a grandson recently. His daughter, when she was delivered, the delivery, the 5 days in hospital, 6 weeks of postnatal care, and the postnatal visit, $215 is what her family doctor got.
But you've probably picked out the cheapest service in the book.
I'm picking out one that's typical and topical. And if you look at the cost of immunizing your cat, $25 at the vet, $5 if you immunize your child at the doctor's office.
So first of all, you say right off the bat that the fee schedule for physicians in BC is not significantly above the averages that matter in Ontario.
Well, if you take the what used to be known as the have provinces, Alberta, Ontario, and BC, we're much of a muchness.
Now, but he also accuses you directly of overutilization of the service. Now, you got about $800 million for doctors' fees last year on the fee for service, in which you have all your payments guaranteed, no bad debts. How much did you overutilize the services?
Well, let's look at what he said. He said that when the contract on this program, on Thursday, what he said was that when the contract was signed last year, we predicted and the doctors agreed that the utilization rate would be about 2%. That's not true. We have pointed out to him, or not to Mr. Cuvelier, but to the ministry, that 2% utilization pegging is too restrictive. Now, what in fact we came in at was an extra 3.5%. And what Mr. Cuvelier said was, so what's happened is that the doctors took 3 years utilization rate and took them all and billed them to us this year. Now, if we're going to sit down with the government and try to hammer out an answer to their problems and at the same time protect ourselves, we have to have an amicable atmosphere in which to do it. That doesn't help anybody.
I don't quite understand that. Do you mean that
what he's saying is
you increased the utilization 5.5%?
Utilization went up 5.5%, 3.5% over what was anticipated, and what he's saying is in the life of the contract for 3 years, we helped ourselves to the increase in the first year. Now, that's, first of all, that's provocative and it's unfair. What we as a profession say is that we are prepared to accept responsibility for that utilization over which we have control and which is unjustifiable.
But you have control over all utilization. Do you not? You're the man to, if I go to see him and you say, okay, give him this test, that test, the next test, the bone scan, the heart transplant. Is that what he means by?
Well, you've just spent 20 minutes talking to the federal minister about AIDS. AIDS represents an increase in utilization over the last year of services in BC. We have just had a flu epidemic which ran through this province from October to February. Not only was it a long flu lasting 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, but it was a flu that produced a lot of bronchitis and pneumonia. The people who had the longer flu and the bronchitis and the pneumonia, they had their chest x-rays, they had their blood work, they had their throat swabs. That is increased utilization. Is he saying that we have to be responsible for that?
Well,
Now,
I think what he's saying in an old-fashioned way, and far be it from me to interpret what the minister says, that he wants the medical profession to go a little bit slower on all the additional tests and become old-fashioned GPs who say, here, take this and come back and see me in a couple of months.
Well, I don't think that is what he's saying. I think what he's saying is that we want a capped budget, and any increased utilization over and above the agreed 2% in the contract, you as doctors are responsible for.
And
now,
you have to swallow.
Now, we feel that there has to be an adjustment for population increase. There has to be an adjustment for epidemics such as flu, AIDS. In the last year, we have a new disease that's come on the scene, gestational diabetes. You know, the fetus that gets diabetes because the mother gets diabetes during pregnancy. More and more concern about that, more and more testing as a result. Ultrasound. Ultrasound has springboarded away in the last year or so because it is safer to do an ultrasound procedure than an invasive radiation procedure. So what we're saying is that there are many causes of utilization and we really don't know much about it. 3 months ago, the government, the Ministry of Health and the BCMA set up a committee to look at, as a matter of urgency, the causes of utilization. And that report is due back fairly soon.
And faced with what he said in the budget, therefore, will you be renegotiating fees and payments if this year's increase exceeds 3% on a capita basis?
The government have the right to trigger a review of the contract. There's no doubt about that. They have to sit down with us and show us that the increased utilization over and above the 2% that was agreed is increased utilization over which we as a profession had some control. They cannot expect us to absorb increased utilization over which we had no control.
Right. Utilization, do they mean by that really the number of visits or the expense of procedures?
The number of dollars.
The number of dollars?
The number of
not
dollars.
the number of visits?
Yes, the number of dollars that the healthcare budget increases by over the
So
year of the contract.
You tell me that it's not a possibility to cap the amount of money which has to be paid for medical services, including doctors, because it depends on the state of health of the nation.
Well, you just stop for a moment and think about utilization. If you have a free system with no break on the front end of the system, the patient has been told by the public, here is a free system, use it when you think you have a need, then the government must not get upset if that's what the public do.
And so therefore
part of the increased utilization is under control of doctors, part of it is under control of the patient, and part of it is under the control of the politician. 3 weeks ago, Mr. Peter Jewick told us that we should all have a test for AIDS. Think of the impact on utilization of carrying that out. Now, I'm not saying he's wrong, but he's surely not going to tell me that the doctors of the province are going to carry the cost of it.
One thing on which you agree with Mr. Cuvalier is that there should be modest user charges, which we used to call deterrent fees in earlier days. Agreed?
Well, we have an anachronism, don't we? We have a government that has just introduced user charges in pharmacare, physiotherapy, chiropractic. You notice they missed out massage? Masseurs?
I didn't know
Massage is missed out.
Podiatrist is in.
Yeah, but they've...
Naturopaths are in.
But at the same time, the very week they're doing this, they succumb to the temptation of $90 million from the federal government by complying with the Canada Health Act and agreeing no user charges in the Medicare system. The cost to a hospital like the Surrey Memorial Hospital in user fees this year, $3.4 million.
A big loss.
Now, they have either to find that through increased revenue from the government or decrease in the standard of services.
Your calls and questions to Dr. John O'Brien Bell, President of the BC Medical Association, after the break. Have you had a call from Mr. Cuvalier, the Finance Minister, to sit down yet, or will that come during the course of your normal negotiations?
No, the Executive Director of the BCMA and myself met with the Premier and the Minister of Health on Thursday morning just before the budget, and we had an exchange of views in a cordial manner, so that we were warned ahead of time.
And when does your contract expire? Oh, they can reopen it.
We only signed it just before the election.
Was that the 3-year package?
That's the 3-year package.
2%, 2.4, 2%, and 3%.
Yeah. And that doesn't give the doctors of the province a net increase in their fees. All it does is address the increased cost of running the practice.
Is it fair to take your average wages? You have many doctors who make very big money in the specialty fields.
Well, why don't you take mine? My gross income from Medicare last year was $159,000.
Prior to expenses?
Yes, I have 45% expenses out of that. I work long and hard. I do emergency work, which takes me there overnight at weekends. I earn every cent I get, and if you take off 45% of 159,000, you find out how much my pre-tax income was worth.
And have a good idea how much tax you still pay on that?
Yes.
Well, that's the brightest answer I've ever had to such a question, which I put to many, many doctors over the years.
I don't apologize for my income. I earn every penny of it.
Go ahead, please. No, should you?
Hello?
Go ahead, please.
Is that me?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jack. I'm just wondering, why then the problem with getting new doctors in if they're so short of work? It seems.
Just a minute. You didn't say you were short of work, did you? We're very well doctored in this province. That's one thing on which we will agree in terms of numbers, correct?
Yeah, let me just divert that question.
No, I don't think that's what I meant.
Hold on.
Let me just take that question and put it in context. One of the problems of reopening this contract is that we have a profession at the moment with doctors at the front end of the system, the doctors coming in with restriction of billing numbers and their independence threatened. We have doctors in later years threatened by mandatory retirement at 65. And you wouldn't, I'm sure, Jack, suggest mandatory retirement at 65.
No, I'd be long gone.
Yeah. And then we have a government which is saying to us, you must be totally responsible for utilisation, and then they want to reopen a 3-year contract which the ink is only just dry on, and that is the context in which the doctors of the province are going to have to make a decision on how we respond.
Well, you'll come to an agreement amicably, I'm sure, in due course.
We will certainly try.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'd like to ask the doctor if rather than tax the old age pensioners for the $175 and the drugs that they're using and that they need, if he can suggest an alternative to recoup the money.
You mean on pharmacare?
Yeah.
Well, 7% sales tax, provincial sales tax, or 6% provincial sales tax on tobacco products would be a start, Jack, wouldn't it?
Certainly would be.
They're
no
exempt.
objections.
That would be a start.
No objection. They're not exempt from sales tax.
Yes, they are.
Cigarettes?
Yeah. Provincial.
Oh, provincial.
Yeah.
Are you sure?
I think I'm right. That would be a start, and well, we commented on the mistake of the Canada Health Act imposing on the provinces the inability to raise money by user fees.
Yeah. Go ahead, please.
I was interested to know, did I hear the doctor say that masseurs were excluded from the user fee? As far as I know, there has always been a user fee for a masseurs. Have used one ourselves. We pay the masseurs $20, and then we get $11.20 back from MSA. Which to me
Okay, I stand corrected on that, and the user fee is in the total.
Yes,
Yeah,
I have a vague remembrance of that myself. Go ahead from Vancouver.
Yes, I had wanted to ask Dr. M or Mr. F this, but maybe Dr. Bell can answer it. Why, if with such a wonderful medical plan that we have, why don't they make it universal as a small user's fee?
Well, we don't know that.
We do know that. As a profession, we have suggested that time and time and time again. The problem is that Medicare is in the political arena, and the decisions have to be made based on ballot box response. And it is unacceptable, and the Canada Health Act proved that, it's unacceptable to the people of Canada to
add deterrent fees.
Add
And of
user
course,
fees. I don't think they're deterrent
no,
fees.
user fees.
User fees. Yeah.
There was a time, though, when people were advocating quite strong deterrent fees because of the overutilization by the patient of the system.
Well, I don't think the patient can overutilize the system. If you say to them, here's a free service, use it when you think you have a need, That's not abuse.
There's no other way we can handle it. We have one of the best Medicare systems, if not the best Medicare system in the entire wide world.
But notice what Mr. Jewett said a few weeks ago, that what the government intend to provide is the best possible, the best affordable healthcare system. What Mr. Justice Emmett Hall made the basic premise of Medicare was the highest standard of health for all Canadians. And we're beginning to see a differential between the two.
A lot of money.
Yeah, but the best affordable is probably all a government can do just now, is it not?
Yes, but remember that the difference is going to be the quality of care.
Go ahead, please. Hello. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I just wanted to say that Dr. O'Brien Bell and Dr. Parker Sutton saved my life, and I think they're wonderful, and they deserve every cent that they get.
Thank you.
They're wonderful men.
Thank you. Now we go to Salmon Arm. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Jack.
Yes.
I'd like to ask the doctor, if it's a doctor's practice, when a husband and wife go in, if both husband and wife are billed to the government for one particular answer.
No.
Well, I have had just recently, my husband has Alzheimer's disease, and my son and I want him to go in with me so he would know what was going on. And he and his wife and I went to see the doctor, and we were all in one room. We just asked the questions, and yet we are all billed for it.
How many people were there?
3. My son, myself, and my daughter-in-law.
And how long did the interview with the doctor last?
About 20 minutes.
Well, the doctor could have billed you either the ordinary office visit, or he could have billed a prolonged discussion if it was 20 minutes or more.
But normally, if you go in with somebody to help your wife, you just bill for the patient.
No, unless you've come to discuss specifically the future management.
No, that's off the topic altogether. Now, you're hopeful that you can come to an agreement with the government on renegotiating the contract on which the ink is barely dry without any great troubles.
Well, I met with the Premier just before the budget, and it was a cordial meeting. We both understand each other's point of view, and we are both going to try and solve the problem. The one assurance I did give him was that the doctors of British Columbia are not naive enough to go the route
My
to the
thanks to John O'Brien Bell, President BCMA. After the break. We'll find out tomorrow if Jean Charest, the Federal Minister of Youth, has any plans for jobs for young Canadians this year emanating out of Ottawa money, and also Dale Alexander, bright guy, 5 p.m. precisely.